Hello everyone, I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, all about 47-day TLS. I have Jason Sirocco and Tim Callan here for you today. As always, this presentation is being recorded and we'll share it with you afterwards, most likely tomorrow. Finally, if you've got any questions during the presentation, send them our way. Please use the chat function and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. Jason and Tim, let's get started.
Thanks, Leah. And I think I'm just looking at the slide. I think we missed an opportunity because we should have targeted 47 minutes of content to match the 47 days. And I think we should get into why it's 47, not 45, because you may have heard about 45 days in other stories and stuff, but the real number now is 47. So here's what we want to go through today. We'll do some background about what's happening at all, and what the timing looks like and things along those lines. And as I said, if you've been looking at earlier communications on this topic, it is evolving. It is a proposal, and the proposal is changing, not dramatically, but it is changing. So we'll get you current on what the current proposal is. And then you see what the big thing we're going to talk about is what you do about it. And so first of all, let's talk about shortening certificate lifespans. And so this really, well, even before this, there has been a trend for years to shorten the lifespan of public certificates of all stripes, with a particular focus on SSL certs, TLS, but affecting other kinds of certificates as well. And the latest development in that, right now we're sitting at a maximum of 398 days by the CA Browser Forum rules and various root program rules. On March 3rd, 2023, Google Chrome started to push the idea of moving to a 90-day certificate. And this is something they care about a lot. They're very committed to. And also, they were viewing this as a starting point and an evolutionary thing that they were trying to drive. So we've been talking about this, as an eventuality. What does this mean to us? And the whole industry has been kind of discussing what it means. The next step on this was that little over a month ago, Apple introduced a draft ballot. They did this during the fall face-to-face meeting of the CA Browser Forum that had a step-down process that eventually, at the time it was in 2027, would have had us sitting at maximum TLS term of 45 days. We'll get into that step-down, what it looks like in the next slide. So that concept of the step-down that ends in 45 days was introduced about 6 weeks ago. An update to the draft from Apple has moved that number from 45 days to 47 days, and I'll get into that on the next slide. And so that's where we sit right now. We were sitting at a proposal that is going to reduce the maximum term of certs over time in a series of reductions that eventually winds up in a very short time. So let me walk you through this chart and then we'll get into the details, right? The first one, this is occurring to the most current proposal from Apple, right? And let me emphasize, this is a proposal. It is not yet a rule. It could be that it will never be a rule, but I think this or something that looks pretty similar to it probably will be. And the exact timing on when that happens is also not clear, although I don't think we're looking at the distant future. I think we're looking at months from now, not years from now, for this to become a hard and fast rule. And between now and then, we'll help you track it and see where it's going. But the first column is the date where the new maximum term occurs. And to be clear, that is for actions on or after that date. So for a certificate that is issued on March 14, 2026, it would still be 398 days, and that cert would be allowed to live its full term, even though 200 days after March 15 is before the end of that earlier cert, if that makes sense. So this is once you issue an on that date or later, that is the maximum term for a certificate that is issued, right? Does that make sense, Jay? Did I explain that clearly?
Yes, you did.
Okay. The next column is the maximum number of days. That is, so the max days. So it's allowed up to that day. It's not allowed beyond that. So 200 days is fine. 201 is not, right? 199 is also fine. Anything under that is fine. The third one is what we call the DCV reuse period. This is the period for which you can take a domain control validation that you have conducted and consider it to be uh, 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 okay to reuse. So if I issue a certificate to jasonsirocco.com and then tomorrow you come back and order another certificate from me, I don't have to redo DCV, right? Because it's within the reuse period. And as you see, that reuse period is also going to come down. It's going to come down quite dramatically. And let's come back to why that's happening and why that's important. And then the last one is the OV, the organization validation reuse period, which right now is sitting at 825 days, and Apple intends to bring it down to 1 year, right? 366 to account for a leap year, but 1 year. So this is, if I authenticate Jason Sirocco Incorporated, and then you come back to get another cert from me in a week, I can reuse that. I don't have to re-authenticate Jason Sirocco Incorporated, but if you come back to me in 53 weeks, I do, right? So that's what the columns mean. Now let's walk down what's happening here. So today we have these times: 398 days for cert term, 398 days for DCV reuse, and 825 days, which is 2 years plus some slop for OV reuse, right? And so what's going to happen is Apple has us stepping this down over time. And in mostly annual increments, we step down, step down, step down. And in so doing, we're reducing the time that we actually have these to use. So 200 days. That's a funny number. That's an interesting number, right, Jay? What's going on with 200 days, right?
To
Well,
me, yeah,
yeah.
Tim,
Go ahead.
I tell you what my gut feel is, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. I think that the concept of 90 days, basically, I think a lot of people said, from the Google proposal, I like 90-day certificates, but I'd like a little bit more time so that I get the full
Yeah,
value of a 90-day certificate. So let's make it 100 days,
right.
just like a
It's
1 year
exactly
certificate
right,
cost.
Jay.
Yeah,
It's
and then
it's
if
the different it's the difference between the intended renewal cadence and the maximum time in order to give you a little bit of slippery room in case you want to renew a cert early, but you want to keep it on schedule, or in case you can't do it the exact day you would have because that happens to fall on Sunday, right? And so it gives us a little bit of flex. So 398 days right there is a little over a year. It's a year plus some to account for that exact need for flexibility. 200 days is half a year, which is approximately 180 days, plus some. 100 days is 90 days, or let's put it this way: 200 days is 6 months plus some. 100 days is 3 months plus some, because they're actually imagining that we're going to be on a calendar cadence, not a day count cadence. So instead of saying, I'm going to renew it every 90 days, you're saying, I'm going to renew it on the 15th every 3 months, which means the actual number of days that you renew it is going to float a little, because some days have more days, some months have more days than others, right? And then in addition to that, then you bump into things like weekends and holidays. So you say, well, according to my calendar, that falls on Saturday. We'll do it the following Monday instead. And so it gives you a little bit of flexibility to do that. And let's return to that too, because I think that tells us some interesting things. So 100 days is 90 days plus some. 47 days is a month plus some. And
Tim, yeah,
yeah,
Tim, I'll tell you what. So just the implications of that for people who are doing the arithmetic.
Mhm.
I think that people are suggesting that a renewal, hopefully an automated renewal, is happening every 30 days,
Yeah.
which increases the number of times you are doing a renewal 12 times compared to
Yes.
what you were with a 1 year certificate or a 390-day
A-
certificate.
Absolutely. 12 times the work. Because when you see the 47 days, like I think the point is not to imagine that you're doing this every, 8 times a year, every 45 days. That's not the point. The point is to imagine that you're doing this every month. And what 47 days is it's more than 2 weeks longer than the longest possible month. So that even if I'm bumping into a holiday or someone's vacation or something, I still have room to shift it around and keep it in the maximum term. And this is very explicit. Like the proposer at Apple who proposed this on one of the public lists explained the rationale. And that was exactly the rationale, what I just said. This isn't me reading tea leaves. This came from the proposer to say this is why we have the days we have. And a point I want to make here, Jason, and I've made this on our podcast in case anyone's listened to this, is when I see that, I see a couple things. One is I see a proposal that has been thought through carefully. So it could be easy to throw out days like 90 and 45, because they're nice round numbers and we all can think of them really easily. But this is somebody who thought about it carefully, thought about what it meant, and put together a proposal that would work well in production. And then that's the second point about this is a proposal as I interpret it. This is not a browser being mean because they're big meanies and they want to be mean. This is a browser making this as soft and friendly as they conceivably can while still achieving the security objective that is paramount, right?
Yeah,
And I see that when I
it's
look at
unu
those decisions, right?
yeah,
Go
Tim,
ahead,
it's
Jay.
unusual for sometimes the big tech companies to or anybody to take into account the needs of the people who live in the trenches and actually get this work
Mhm.
done. But in this case, if you talk to your Linux administrator who is actually doing these renewals quite often, they're not renewing on, whatever the expiry date is. Nobody in their right mind would wait right to the last minute. And
Yeah.
so this is giving everybody ample chance to
Yep.
deal with mistakes and fat
And when
fingering.
all this stuff happens, I've got an automated script, and for some reason today it doesn't go. And we go and we don't know why, and we figure out there's some bug and we fix the bug, but in the meantime we miss the day or someone's got to do it manually. And if you've got some cushion there, then disasters don't happen. If you don't have cushion there, they do. But to take this back, you're being given cushion so that you have the opportunity to deal with mistakes, not so that you can still wait until the last minute and put yourself in jeopardy. So anybody who goes and says, okay, this is great, I'm going to renew my certs every 200 days, is missing the memo, right? And that's the point. That the reason it says 200 days is you're intended to do it every 6 months. And if you go do that, then you're using the system in the right way and the system is taking care of you. If you turn around and you start sticking it on the calendar every 199 days, then you're not using it the way it's intended and the system is not taking care of you.
Tim, I'm going to throw in an idea. Take it
Yeah.
for what you will, but I think the intention really is to get to that 100 days and eventually 47. The 200-day marker is to put a line in the sand to say to people, look, 200 days still isn't the end of the world if you have to be doing things in a manual
Right.
renewal cycle. But we're giving people time to catch up, and so that every
Mhm.
certificate can be a managed certificate and fully automated. That 200
Yeah.
day is
Right.
it's just that right on the threshold of being just a little bit too painful for some people to, you know, if you have to do it manually, 200 days is probably the last hurrah for you.
Correct, Jay. And I think it's correcting the chicken egg problem. So we have a chicken egg problem with shorter certificates, which goes as follows. Every time anyone says, let's shorten the lifespan of certificates, a bunch of people come back and say, but if you do that, everything's going to break. And then the folks who want to shorten the lifespan of the certificate say, okay, well, why don't you get your stuff fixed so it won't break? And then the world doesn't. Enterprises don't do it. And then the next time a year later, someone comes along and says, hey, we need to shorten the lifespan of certificates. People say, you can't do that because everything's going to break. What the 6-month mark does is it's what you said, Jay. It puts people in a position where they can get through if they have to, but they're going to be well motivated to make the changes needed to deal with these shorter lifespans, and that involves installing automation. Plus, there is a known, established step down cadence coming. So they can go back and say, all right, we're at 6 months. This is sucking. We're getting through, but we've got to do something about it. Number one, because this is sucking, and number two, because next year it's going to be 100, and the year after that it's going to be monthly, right? And so it breaks the chicken egg problem by being a forcing function for enterprises to get agile and get automated without breaking them in the meantime. And I think it is a very smart and again very well considered proposal. All right, so let's talk to DCV reuse, right? Another big thing that we know that browsers care about a great deal is the accurate marriage of domains to certificate ownership. They hate the idea that you could have a legitimate, valid certificate that is not misissued, that you got legitimately throughout any and without any skeeviness, that is not for a domain that you own. And they hate the idea that I could get a cert today for I could buy a cert and get DCV'd, sell the domain tomorrow, wait 397 days, buy another cert for 398 days, and now 26 months later have a legitimate non-misissued certificate for a domain I haven't owned for 26 months. They hate that. And I know why they hate that. I hate it too. We want a marriage of certificates to domain ownership that is as pure. We want the Venn diagrams to overlap as purely as possible. And so what you're seeing here is you're seeing a step down period, and most of the way it mirrors what's going on with the certificate term, which is great because it makes it easy for everyone to remember, right? You got 6 months of certificate term, you got 6 months of DCV reuse, right? It's easy to remember. And then when we get down to the bottom in 2028, they move the DCV reuse to where they want to be, which is 10 days. And what's the rationale behind 10 days? Well, it's quick enough that anything that you're doing as a single flight will all get covered, right? If you go and you order, you need 5 certs and you go and you order 5 different certs, you have to go push the button 5 times. DCV isn't being done 5 times. That's fine. And again, 10 days is a little over a week. So, if I order my first cert on Monday, I can get whatever I want this week and I'm not going to have to redo DCV. But it's not really longer than that. So there's a close marriage of certificate ownership to domain ownership. And when you combine that with a step down of the maximum certificate term, all of a sudden, the most we could conceivably be out of alignment is 57 days. And that's an awful lot better than 26 months.
Tim, a lot of times when we get into these kinds of discussions, and I know you and I do, um, all of a sudden it makes you realize just how long problems could have persisted back in the days of 5 and 10 year certificates,
Oh,
3
yeah.
year certificates, 2 year certificates, and then all of a sudden it makes you realize 398 days is a very long time.
It's a very long time. And the wake up call, there's been a few wake up calls on this one, but probably the most obvious one is the deprecation of SHA-1. Because at that time we were allowed to have 3-year certificates. And so there was there was a decision made industry-wide that we just couldn't use SHA-1 anymore. And a date was set, but people said, look, we need time to get off it, and you got to let us do our systems and stuff. So a date was set in the future. It was like 1 year in the future. And then when that day came, right up until the day before, people were out there issuing 39-month certificates. And so then the day came, no more SHA-1, hooray, no more SHA-1. And then more than 3 years later, there was still SHA-1 in production on legitimate, valid, non-misissued, correctly issued certificates. And at the time, a whole bunch of people in the community and in the browser community said, this is not okay. We need more crypto agility than this. Before we hit that, so the last one is the OV reuse period. It's the same basic principle. The idea is 825 days is a long time. You know, organizations change hands, things change. And 825 days is a long time. That's 2 entire years. And let's just bring that down to once a year. You'll see that does step down and stop at once a year. That, I believe, is in recognition of the fact that org validation is kind of heavy and kind of hard. And so there's a trade-off between how easy it is and how valuable it is, and you got risk-reward trade-offs, or you know, kind of return on investment trade-offs. And in this case, Apple is happy with the idea that we do this org validation once a year. Again, when I look at this, what I see is I see a well-considered proposal where somebody really thought about the details. It would have been easy to kind of step down OV with everything else. And instead, that would have been kind of the brain dead approach. But instead of this, somebody with a brain turned on looked at it and said, no, I think that is the right term for organization validation. And so again, when I look at all of this, I see something that's been considered, that has been built on community feedback. And one of the things that tells me is that this is probably a solid plan that's going to not change a lot. It already has changed. The original proposal had the first step down occurring in September of 2025. And I think there was a lot of community feedback to say, hey, that's less than a year. Give us a little more time. And you see that Apple listened to that. The second thing that occurred was I think Apple considered that 45 days, which was the number they originally had, was less than 2 weeks longer than the longest month, right? And they wanted to give you a full 2 weeks plus over the longest month. So you take a 31-day month, that's an additional 16 days. Now I've got the full 2 weeks just to be really cautious about creating situations where people have to, you know, come in on their vacation. So with 2-week vacations being kind of a thing that a decent number of people do, we just wanted it to, you know, give us a little more room to move. So both of those changes came with the feedback from the community and further consideration. And I think that's an important point too, because we are seeing a proposal here that is listening to community feedback and evolving based on what we see. And again, all of this makes me feel like this is a pretty solid thing. And I predict that Apple's gonna, you know, not just change their mind and say, no, we're not gonna do this. I think this is what Apple wants to do.
You know, Tim, I think it's for the right reasons. You know,
Yeah.
you brought up a few, you know, the example of the SHA-1 deprecation that happened in
Mm-hmm.
3 years. You know, I'd like to also propose, I think that the length of time that key compromise could affect a domain,
Yeah.
I think that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, CA misissuance, whether it's small or large misissuance,
Yeah.
I think all of these things add up together to why shortening certificate lifespans are a very good idea.
Absolutely.
It is the right thing to do.
And browsers have been explicit about all these points you made: key compromise, misissuance, crypto agility, migration to post-quantum cryptography, and encouragement of automation. Those are all things that I have seen in writing or heard directly out of the mouths of the people who make these decisions at the browsers. And so those are the factors that are motivating this. And they're right, right? It is a more secure world with shorter certificates, and what they're trying to do is find a bridge to get us there without breaking the internet in the meantime. So uh, uh, this is a cool slide. It's. I kind of wanted to include it, so I found an excuse to stick it in. This is just these are known examples of certificate outages at, you know, brand names that you and I know, where in this case there was an outage or a breach, and it is known to be due to certificate error, almost all of which are failure to renew. And this is just a great way to illustrate the problem, because when you look down this list, this is the best of the best. I see Google and Microsoft and major banks and major security firms and Cisco and Spotify, like major telcos. These aren't um, mom and pop shops. These are the people with the resources and the know-how and the stakes to get it right, and they're getting it wrong. Also, this isn't declining over time, and so this slide just, I think, is a great way to illustrate that all of us, the whole industry, the entirety of enterprises on this planet, have a problem that we haven't addressed yet. And the solution to that is automation. And so again, one of the motivators behind shortening certificate lifespans is get people to automate. And when you look at the slide, you see why that's a real need.
Yeah, Tim, my Starlink went out. It's dead center on this chart,
Yeah,
and
you're
I
a
remember
victim
that
of
event.
this. Yeah. Oh yeah, and I remember my Microsoft Teams went down. I remember my 065 went down. I got those. I got hit by those. 40 million people lost their O2. Um, so yeah. Okay. Um, I think we've beaten this point to death, except for this bullet down in the bottom, which is that for automation purposes, you don't have to use Acme, but for most people, Acme is going to be the obvious choice. And Acme is a great choice because there is so much support, right? You can take Acme, you can get it from, you know, your leading CLM or your leading CA, including Sectigo, right? Your CLM and your CA from Sectigo, and you can support it with most of the operating systems and, you know, networking equipment that you're going to use. So it's going to give you not universal coverage, but a great deal of coverage. And Acme is a great choice, and it's robust and it's proven and it's evolving and getting better. It's open source, so you can feel good about it being, you know, secure and patched and all of that stuff. And Acme is just it's a great way to go. I think we've covered this slide. So this is our short-lived certificate. Let's call it our 40-day survival checklist. And these are the main steps that we're talking about. Jason, you want to walk us through these steps?
Certainly, I think that in any cybersecurity endeavor, your very first step is to know what you have. Remember what I said a little earlier? I'm going to repeat it again and again. Every certificate should be a managed certificate, and you cannot manage what you don't know you have. So
Yep.
awareness. And one of the pillars of certificate lifecycle management, Tim, is discovery. And that is a capability that I think, Tim, a lot of those outages we saw on that really great chart you had were due
Mm-hmm.
to certificates that those large organizations didn't know they had. They needed to perform discovery. That's
Yeah.
always going to be step one.
Rogue certificates are a thing. And again, just like I think we don't see that the frequency or severity of outages is getting smaller, likewise, we don't see that the instance of rogue certificates is getting smaller, right?
No, in fact, it might even be getting larger, Tim,
It
because
might.
look, shadow IT is real. We're now even hearing terms like shadow AI, shadow a lot of things, and
Mm,
I don't think that that will ever go away, and therefore discovery is just important.
yep, yep, absolutely. And of course, you know, manually creating an inventory is not the same thing as discovery. If
No,
you
it's
manually
not.
create an inventory, which you should do, then what you're doing is you're documenting all the certs you know about in a single place. That is a great thing. If you haven't done that, do that. But don't view that as a surrogate for discovery, because what discovery is doing is it's giving you the certificates that you don't know about. And otherwise, you're going to find out about them when something ain't working, nobody can figure out why it's working, money's being lost, customers are pissed, people are running around with their hair on fire, and eventually it turns out there's a certificate that nobody knew existed that somebody bought a year ago and promptly forgot about and took everything down. And we see this over and over and over again. All right, so the second step, step two, is kind of the same thing for your tech. And this is sort of what we talked about when we say, well, most of the equipment and most of the routers are going to support Acme. Note the word most. So an important thing to do here is understand what are my automation options and do my environments support it, right? And that's where step three is automation mapping. How does that match up? What can I just throw Acme against and it'll just plain work? What doesn't work with Acme, but I can solve it another way, and what is unsolved?
Tim, I'll give you some real world examples.
Yeah.
If you're talking about Apache or Nginx, in the case of Apache, Acme's even built into that server if you'd like to use it. And for every other web server, Acme is we're very, very well suited to most circumstances. Where things get a little different is if you're running something like a load balancer, a
Hmm.
network appliance style load balancer. Vendors who sell certificate lifecycle management will often have, and the better ones will definitely have, the capability of provisioning certificates into those kinds of custom locations. So
Right.
that's part of what you're talking about, Tim, is understanding what the vendors have in step two, and then mapping that to your needs in step three.
Yeah, exactly. And then that gives you what you need to go through and build your rollout plan, step four, which is to say, how am I going to actually ensure that this takes place? And how am I going to ensure this takes place within the timeframes we're talking about? And this is where the step down also matters, right? Because you might say, look, I can get 90% of the problem done before March of 2026. And so I'm going to do that. And 99% of the certs will be automated. And I'm going to muddle through the other 10% every 6 months while I get those systems retrofitted to deal with the problem. So when March of 2027 rolls around, now I'm at 98% of certs are being handled. And then I'm going to deal with those every 3 months. It's going to be awful while I retrofit those though, so that when I hit the monthly cadence, I'm at 100%. Like that's kind of a realistic sort of approach that I think we'll see some enterprises taking. And if you're able to get ahead of the class and get it all done the first time out, then good, because you don't have to worry and you're going to do less work and you're going to be more agile and it's all going to be wonderful. But that's the kind of planning that you want to be making at this stage. But you can't do that until you know what your certs are. You can't do that until you know what your vendor tech is, and you can't do that until you know what it supports.
Tim, for larger organizations that might come down to that list of certificates that they don't know how to automate because there are some processes,
Mm-hmm.
then what I would suggest is evaluate strongly whether or not you're using a publicly trusted certificate properly. I'm increasingly seeing
Yeah,
organizations who've been using publicly trusted certificates when a private certificate should be there in place.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big thing that you're seeing a lot of discussion right now in the CA browser forum community is, a lot of enterprises saying, well, we can't handle this for a variety of reasons. We can't because of this and that and the other thing. And the answer ultimately comes back to you got two paths forward. You either get your systems to the point where you can handle it, or you acknowledge that this is a private PKI use case and you switch to private PKI, in which case these time limits won't affect you. And it's only those two. There isn't really another path forward. If you want to be part of the public web PKI, these time limits will affect you. And if your environment doesn't allow it, you really need to be on private CA.
You'll be hearing a lot more about this from Tim and I in future
Yeah,
communications and
yeah.
podcasts.
Yeah. And then step 5 here, crypto agility, right? Just at the end of the day, what we get when all is said and done is the crypto agility and the certificate agility that the browsers are looking for that makes everybody's life better and stronger. And again, if you listen to our podcast or if you've joined us on other webinars, you've heard about revocation and you've heard about shortening lifespans and you've heard about outages and all these things that you hear about over and over and over again are all solved with crypto agility, which is why it is such an important goal. I think we talked about this. These are your options. Acme is not your only option. It is a very good option, but there are APIs and agents and other ways to do this, and other protocols like SCEP and EST. So there's things you can do. And I think we're ready for questions. Let me just real quickly say, if you did like this conversation, Jason and I do a podcast. We publish new episodes every week. We just put out episode number 440. It is the Root Causes PKI and Security podcast. Search for Root Causes wherever you listen to podcasts. It'll very likely be the first thing you hear or the first result you see. Come join us. Come subscribe. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Great, and we have a few. The first question is, does 12 times more renewals also mean 12 times more cost?
Oh, I know. So this isn't this isn't some scheme to milk more money out of the market, right? And I'm sure that while these things don't exist yet, so I don't know that any CA actually has shown us what their pricing model will be. I'm sure the market is going to require that your annual outlay remains more or less the same. So either if it's because you're getting when we move to 200 days, maybe you're getting your certs for half the price, or maybe you're getting some kind of annual subscription. I got to imagine when you get down to a monthly cadence, you're probably not making 12 purchases a year. You're probably on some kind of subscription plan in some form. And as that happens, I don't imagine that the market will make it possible for CAs to suddenly ramp up their prices. That's not what this is for. That's not what anyone's trying to accomplish.
CAs are going to be highly motivated to make sure they're not pricing this any higher than before. And a subscription basis absolutely makes the most sense, especially, Tim, with that conversation you and I had about the fact that a 45-day certificate, you're probably going to be renewing that every 30 days. So if you're renewing well ahead of the actual expiry date and you're doing that over a period of a year, that just screams for a subscription model.
Yeah. So, yeah, next one.
Great. Next one is, are there any advantages to reduce the validity of internal and private certificates as well?
Yeah, heck yeah, all the same things, right? If so public certs are under the purview of the CA browser forum because we're all stakeholders, because all humanity is a stakeholder, and therefore it's done in a public way for everybody. Your own network, it's yours. It's your property. You get to do whatever you want. If you want to do something dangerous, no one's going to stop you. That said, it's better not to do something dangerous. And so, what does not dangerous look like? That is things like shorter certificate lifespans and proper keys and proper encryption algorithms and moving to post quantum cryptography when the time comes. And all that stuff is still stuff you should do. So, yeah, for your internal CA, for all the same reasons, get automated, shorten your certificate lifespans, crank them out fast, protect your keys, migrate to PQC, and do all of these other smart things under those circumstances as well. Do you want to add to that, Jay?
No, Tim, I think you covered it.
Great. The next question is, are the Google 90-day proposal and the Apple 47-day proposal fixed already?
Well, okay, so let's clarify. There will be one. So Google came out first. Google said, hey, let's move to 90 days. You should think of that more as a North Star than a proposal. There weren't concrete things there. It was Google saying, look, this is a thing we need to do. The Apple proposal is a bona fide proposal. This thing will happen on this date. Here's how it's going to look, and this is the rule, right? So there's only one proposal. Google has stated, the Chrome root store folks have stated on public mailing lists that they are in favor of, that they're happy with the Apple proposal and they're happy to line up behind it. So I do not believe we should anticipate dueling proposals. I think we should look for one proposal, and I think to the degree that the Chrome root store team or anyone else has an opinion about how to modify it, they'll be providing that opinion in public dialogue, and the single proposal will get modified to reflect it. So I think that's a very important point. Don't think there's someone's going to say 90 and someone else is going to say 45. I think we're going to have a single step down that everybody is following, where everybody has the same rules, regardless of what browser they're connecting to.
Great. And that was actually one of the next questions as well. Do you think Google and Apple will agree on common maximum terms? So I think that
Yeah,
answered that.
and again, Chrome has been like public with the fact that of saying this is good. We're happy to line up behind this.
Brilliant. The next question is, will it stop at 47 days or will the certificate terms drop further?
Oh, yeah. I think in a long enough time horizon, we should expect it to continue to drop. There's been a lot of focus on 10 days. So if you look at the step down proposal, we do notice that there's that 10-day DCV reuse period. There also is now something that's been passed by cab form ballot, and recently the last requirement has been removed by a major root store, so that for certificates that are not more than 10 days in term, no revocation checking is required. You don't have to have OCSP, you don't have to have CRL. The idea is that the cert naturally terming out is a surrogate for revocation. So when you look at revocation, is still possible, but checking is not required. So when you look at it that way, there's a lot of arrows pointing at 10 days now, aren't there? So you have to imagine that in a long enough time horizon, there will continue to be pressure to shorten certificate lifespans, with 10 days as something of an ultimate goal or a holy grail. That said, I don't think we're getting there for a long time, right? It's 3.5 years just to get to 47 days. So what's it going to take to get to 10 days? Another 4 years? Longer? So I do think that's a realistic possibility. I think it's hard to predict anything that far in the future. But the last point I'm going to make, and Jay, I think maybe you were about to say something. The last point I'm going to make is once you can handle a 47-day cadence, once you're doing this every month, why not do it every week? You're
You took the
automated.
words out of my mouth,
Who
Tim.
cares, right? So what I would hope we would see is once we get to April 15 and everybody's prepared to do this monthly, I would hope to see a lot of people doing it much more frequently than that. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's an awful lot right with that. And I think we're all hoping that we will get to the point where, yes, maybe we'll chase it down to 10 days, but we're hoping we're going to get to the point where enterprises are leading rather than enterprises having to be dragged. And that's another thing that we're looking for here.
Great. With the focus on automation, can automation go wrong?
Yeah, software errors can occur, right?
I can tell you,
It's software.
we
Yeah.
actually discussed this quite a lot during the webinar,
Hmm.
which
Sure.
is that is the reason why we are suggesting on a 45-day certificate, when you get to that, you renew every 30 days. That gives you
Yep.
15 days to deal with inevitable issues.
Hmm.
Tim, I'll also offer this. The fifth pillar of CLM, according to our definition, includes integrating into IT systems, which help you to deal with,
Yeah.
oh, my certificate did not provision properly. I now
Right.
have a ticket automatically open to go and deal with this. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we have thought about this very hard because problems will be inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah. System outages occur, software errors occur, these things occur. And we do need to be cognizant of that and have systems that account for that. The other thing I'll point out, though, is that software errors occur less often than human errors occur.
Yes.
So if you're looking at the potential for software error as your rationale for failure to um, uh, uh, automate, that's just a sophistry. Like you're going to be worse off doing it with people than you are doing it with software. Your
A
your
manual
success rate is
renewal,
higher with software.
a manual renewal of hundreds of certificates in a larger organization every 30 days, believe me, you're going to have a lot of problems compared to automating it. Look, once everybody is getting used to automation, of which, you take a look just at the number of people using Let's Encrypt, for example, with Acme. You're talking about hundreds of millions of certificates which are successfully being renewed right now. I think we're looking at a success story here, Tim, in terms of the way that automation will dramatically change the way people think about their certificates and renewals.
Mm, yeah.
Okay, I think one of the last questions is what resources do you recommend to learn about how to implement certificate automation?
Oh, well, we have a bunch. I mean, we have a guide. I don't know if you have it in the last slide. We probably do. I can go to the last slide. Yeah. So first of all, come get our 47-day survival guide, right? So shameless plug, sectigo.com/47-day SSL. That is the first thing, and that'll get you started, and that's got much more detail than what we went over here in terms of things to do. Second of all, shameless plug number two, come listen to Jason and me. We talk about this all the time. Other than that, it's some of what we talked about. So understand. A big one is understand what your own systems do, right? And that should come from your vendors, right? Do you support Acme? Well, I would make a big spreadsheet and I'd put down everything that I'm using, and I would have a support Acme question mark column with a Y or an N, and I'd just send them an email, right? Ask them. That's a big part of it right there. And then what else, Jay?
Now, I really do think that uh, understanding this will come from doing the first couple of things on those steps, which is taking inventory of where your cryptographic assets are, especially publicly trusted digital certificates, and then enabling certificate lifecycle management, putting on discovery. Trust me, you will learn more about your own environment and how to do this properly. The thought process will come streaming into you once you've really taken the inventory part of the process seriously. I think that the step one and step two that we showed earlier are vital to understanding your particular case.
Great. That covered all of our questions. As no more have come in, I think we can probably finish here.
Oh,
Thank you everyone for your time, and thanks Jason and Tim. If you've got any more questions, then do get in touch with the Sectigo team directly. We also have another webinar coming up very soon on December the 3rd, all about quantum, and you can sign up on our website already. But for now, thank you and have a good rest of your day.
thanks.